conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Y'all ready? Let's go. Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in, no rushing. But time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Well, welcome back to the conversation. I have Dave, the wonderful Dave here. Harold will be joining us in a second, and we're going to get into the second half of this episode of the conversation. We're going to get into the political turmoil in Florida, and then we're going to have a part two on it because, again, there's a lot to talk about and a lot to discuss. And so we're going to start off the show with our weekly Ukraine update, bi-weekly Ukraine update from Dave. Dave, what are some things that you have noticed going on politically or over in Ukraine that's a concern to you or you want to discuss?
Well, Ukraine is hanging in there, and I actually recently I'm teaching a class on power and influence, and we have a sanctions section. And this week is the sanctions on Russia and talking about that. And so I was looking at the sanctions and what's going on there. And the one little update is it's not necessarily new. It's part of this trend. The sanctions on oil and are starting to bite, and it's been a mild winter, and so Europe is over the hump in terms of natural gas. They were really dependent on Russian natural gas all last year. They stockpiled, they built terminals to bring in liquid natural gas, and they topped off the tanks. And going into the winter, the fear was that it would be cold. They would drop down to a level that they couldn't recover from before the next winter. A lot of people were even worried about next winter. Okay, all that's not an issue. Forget all that. There are now people talking about they might have enough gas now to last through next winter. And so certainly topping off the tanks again probably won't be a problem because they are getting liquid natural gas. As far as oil goes, for a long time, people were slow to put sanctions on oil in the case of the EU. U.S. did it immediately. But Putin picked his time well. He picked a time when, if you recall, last summer, gas prices were cray-cray.
Right.
And so, at that point, even though people were sanctioning him, what happens when you sanction a product?
Yes, I was going to say, talk about that, because some people don't understand when they say sanction. They just think, oh, everything's cut off, or they don't exactly know what that means.
That's a good point, because I saw a oil industry expert claiming the sanctions weren't working because the oil was flowing. And it's like, no. What happens is you cut off the sanctioning coalition cuts off the target from part of the world's market. Mm-hmm. And the question is, can the target export its product to the rest of the world and still get as much, right? Is there enough demand for the product in the rest of the world to absorb it and keep the price up? Now, in the case of Russia, which is a huge producer of oil, they have found other markets for their oil, but they have been having to sell about $30, $20 to $30 below the normal market price. And it's varied a little, but it's been in the $20 to $30 band. It's now $30. And the thing is, though, that the world price was so high last summer that Russia was selling at a discount, but it was still getting as much money as it got before the war began because the prices, were so high. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? They aren't high anymore. Now Russia is getting, instead of getting $60 a barrel, it's getting $40 a barrel. And their oil revenue their fossil fuels revenue, according to a report from Korea Clean Air something or other, they're about half, right? But that's just recently. So the sanctions are only now beginning to bite in that sector.
Right. They don't
And
always affect immediately.
yeah, and by the way, you're probably never going to convince Putin with sanctions to stop this. What the sanctions are going to do are they're going to limit his military capability. And so you have to think of them not as trying to get him to comply with some demand that he pull out, but rather, I think we're in a Cold War now with Russia. I don't think those sanctions will go away. I don't think Putin could make peace. I don't think there's anything he could do that would convince Europe that, yeah, we should buy Russian gas. I don't think, and so I think those, and that means you don't have leverage, right? You can't say, hey, if you make peace, we'll go back to buying your stuff, and that will be part of the deal. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, right now we're waiting on the Russian offensive, right? Everyone is just waiting for Russia to launch an offensive. Everyone is talking about it. And the question that is coming up is whether they're going to launch a two-prong offensive. They're pretty sure they're going to come out of Luhansk, north of Bakhmut, up by Lyman, where they had been pushed out. And they're right now in Luhansk, which is north of Donetsk. And so they have a lot of forces there. And the expectation is they'll push down back to Lyman, Izium, kind of coming behind Bakhmut, going straight for Sloviansk from the north. The question is, will they also come up from the south, right? And there's been a lot of talk about them conducting operations around Vuhledar, but they haven't really been big. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of speculation about that. And there's a question out there whether Putin and his planners are they miscalculating again? Are they overestimating how much strength they have as a result of the mobilization? Will they launch a two-pronged offensive where they don't have enough forces and fall apart? And the Russian mill bloggers, the Russians in that one place they're allowed to talk, right? The ultra-nationalist mill bloggers are about this, debating this, and are worried. So there's a question of, is Putin overestimating his strength? Is he directing Gerasimov, because he put his top general in charge of day-to-day of the operations in Ukraine? It's very like taking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and sending him off to Iraq, right? And he, there's this question: is he pushing that? The mill bloggers, these are Russians, right, who are drank the Kool-Aid. They want to denazify Ukraine. These are the true believers. They're also apparently worried that they're leaving it too late, that the window is closing to get an offensive, because they don't move fast, right? They're encroaching on Bakhmut, but every day it's just this. You need a time-lapse camera to catch the motion on the map, and the Russians themselves are worried that they're leaving it too late because spring is coming. It's not winter is coming. It's not like Game of Thrones. It's spring is coming. The mud is outrageous around there. And I really should have, by this point, memorized their words in Russian and Ukrainian for this time of year. They actually, when you have a word for it.
Yes.
And and also after the mud come the tanks. Right, come all those cool things we're going to give them, plus the trained troops from Grafenwehr, and so right now there's this question of I think the questions at stake are: have we given Ukraine enough stuff to handle the Russian offensive? Probably, because the Russians are probably going to they're probably going to help. The Russians are going to are they going to attack? Are they going to do a two-pronged attack? How much have they learned, right? How better? ISW, there's a lot of assessments out there that they think the UK Ministry of Defense also has said they don't think they have they've generated enough force to do what they want to do.
Mhm.
And then how's the timing with the mud, and will the Ukrainians be able to take the offensive before or after that season? And yeah,
I
so
remember in the beginning, I know a lot of people talked about hurting them economically and getting it to the point we all remember Russia during the first Cold War, how they were hurting so economically and
mhm.
red lines and the economy crashing. And someone was saying, well, Putin has no fear of that because of the history of that country. And he believes his people are strong enough to get through those hard times. And that's what a lot of people thought was going to happen. Russia was going to, when they heard sanctions in the beginning, that Russia was going to be hurt so bad economically, the people would convince him to stop whatever he's doing. But that, I don't think that was anywhere near a reality.
It is not, because you have an authoritarian regime,
Hmm.
and Putin depends on a core group of supporters.
Hmm.
Anders Asland, who wrote about Putin's crony capitalism, he wrote a book, and he himself was a international finance guy who worked at the high levels with Russia under Boris Yeltsin and with Putin, and he's got a lot of experience. He writes on the subject. He also, by the way, ended that book predicting. It was written a few years ago. He predicted that Putin would probably try to start a small victorious war to distract from the lack of growth in the economy. So he predicted the war. But he talks about an aristocracy, that Putin has created an aristocracy. And so the people in that group are what keep Putin in power. And so for sanctions to have an impact on them, you would have to, in some way, threaten their ability to stay and to keep reaping private benefits. And the thing is, as a country gets poorer, being on the if you have an old boys club or you have this inside group, being in the inside group actually becomes more important, because you can't make it on the outside, right? There aren't opportunities to get wealth, and if you're cut out of the coalition, you're even worse off. And so, I keep saying, where's the story of how sanctions convince one of Putin's ministers, one of his cronies, that these guys have gotten rich. His spokesman Peskov is like a billionaire, right? And he's the freaking spokesman, right, for Putin, right? But they've got money coming out of their, and they're going to continue to have a lot of money. They might not have as much as they had before, but they're going to have a lot more than they would have without Putin if they break the coalition. So unless Putin gets sick, right, or something, I just don't see that happening. And so I don't think we're gonna see that kind of change anytime soon. And in a lot of ways, the things he's been able to do have tightened his grip. There is no longer there are no longer independent media. They are passing laws making any kind of criticism of the military. They're making them terrorists. They're arresting people, and they are passing laws. They recently, just in the last couple of days, they passed laws that said that people in the Duma, their legislators and their government officials, mayors of towns and the like, no longer have to publicly report their income. They can now anonymously report the income. And so they're rolling back the institutional curbs on corruption, even making it a better deal to be on the inside while increasing the control over the economy. And so, that's tightening power. So
Mhm.
I often think that was a huge motivation for the war in the first place, was that it would be, like Anders Aslan said, it would be an excuse to, by going and having a quote unquote small victorious war, which, by the way, was a phrase used prior to the Russo-Japanese War by a Russian interior minister, who said, all we need in this country is a small victorious war. We saw how the
Yeah.
Russo-Japanese War
Mhm.
worked
Yes.
out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's there, and that's what's happening. And I think there's a lot of thought that the anniversary of the invasion will be the kickoff for the offensive, which is a
Yeah.
horrible idea because everyone could
Yeah.
see it coming. But we're just now waiting for the shoe to drop, I think.
Well, I have a question before we get into when we talk all things Florida today. Um, you don't see, there's no inner threat that you see for
Inner
Putin.
threat?
Yes. Because you talked about everyone that's closest to him are on board. You don't see anyone as a potential threat from inside.
That's tough. That's really tough. You'll never see it coming. They're almost by definition can't be prior indicators of a coup, right? It has to come out of nowhere,
Mhm.
and it has to be somebody who convinces folks that they are going to have a better deal. And you, I think you could get ultra nationalists who are true believers in Ukraine becoming dissatisfied with Putin if Putin starts to moderate at any point. If he starts to talk about accepting half a loaf, right, and making peace, there is a threat that because he's stoked these ultra nationalists that they might do something. However, I don't see it being an effective coup. An effective coup occurs when a lot of people in this coalition get together and are convinced that they need to move, right, and that they're going to get a better deal with whoever this new guy is. And so when the people with the real power in the country move, um then okay, it's on. And that happens in Russia, right? That's happened several times in the Soviet Union, where groups have said, no, this guy's not doing what we want him to do. Let's form a new coalition. And so, hey, Khrushchev, you're much better than Beria, because Beria is going to get us all killed.
I think
And so,
that happens. It's so funny that whether it's a president in a democracy or a president in an authoritarian place or a dictator, it almost seems like still you may think those people have all the power and they still don't have all the power. The only place I've ever seen where one person has absolutely all the power is North Korea. Other than that, it's no matter where it is, there's just and that's fascinating to me, not in a joyous way, but that's just fascinating to me. No matter how
and
much of a
just,
dictatorship you is, there's a group of
yeah.
people that can get rid of you still.
And just today, just recently,
Mhm.
Kim Jong Un put in place the one thing he's been missing, right? Part of how that regime has stayed in power, it has a good Marxist Leninist structure, which is one of the most stable structures because it has a small group at the top, but it has through the party, it has a what they call a large selectorate, a large group of people who could eventually be in that group.
Mhm.
And that provides a channel for people at all levels to buy into the government, and that provides a way in, which, by the way, Putin's aristocracy doesn't have. But the key to things is having a successor. You have to have a successor, or your coalition, because your coalition needs to know once you start getting older, if you get, if you start coughing, right,
You get
you
dementia.
start looking a little weak. They need to know that there'll be somebody there that their deal is good after you're gone.
Right.
And the Kims have been really, really good at that. That has been one of their, and Kim Jong Un, his 9-year-old daughter, right, has now been put forward, and he is been having her front and center at like military balls and stuff. And they are now sending the message: if I go, I'm young, I'm not going to go anytime soon, because he is young. But he's like, but she's the next one. Everyone line up with that. If you don't line up with that, I have a machine gun outside for you.
Yes.
But
That-
but that is a big part of it. And I like to say, Robert Mugabe was in his 90s and he was hanging on to power because he had a successor. And then he changed the succession plan and within a week was out of power, right? After being in charge of Zimbabwe all that time. So having succession is big. Who's Putin's successor? He
mm.
doesn't have one. So he's got some weaknesses.
Well,
Okay, enough of that.
it's a perfect segue from North Korea to Florida. Uh, so, episode title the political turmoil in Florida. I know Harold has like 90,000 things he wants to talk about, but we're going to compartmentalize and just talk about,
Go
first we're
Harold.
going to start with the top two things that he wants to talk about. With Dave's favorite person to sit. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to label that with Dave, but I'm just kidding, Dave. I'm still sore that I thought you were something that you weren't. So,
Love
so
it.
Okay, but it's my new favorite person, is emerging in Florida.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So, Harold, what's at the top of the list of your irritation with? Because
How do you
I'm in North
choose?
Carolina and I get Florida blurbs every 5 seconds on the news here for some reason.
Well, and I don't even know if you can create a hierarchy, simply because all of it pretty much is at the same level of craziness, weirdness, disappointment, and the level of frustration and the energies that are being created. It's
Mhm.
really incredible. And the theory is with this man looking to ascend to the highest office in the land, which is one of his desires, we will then see this on a national scale, not just a statewide scale. Which we're starting to see some issues with that because the former president is starting his attacks
Mhm.
against the current governor of Florida. But when we look at the whole issue with education, when we look at the whole issue of Black history and things of that nature, I tell people, what is history? And if I could ask Dave, who is a historian, from my perspective, Dave, how would you define history? First of all, let's just go with just the basics, and then advance into the whole issues in Florida. So, Dave, if I could ask you to help our viewers, what is history? Just a simple definition.
Hell, I'm a political scientist. um, I don't know. I think one of the things that historians do is they look at events and they look at facts and they try to recreate the essence of what it is. So a lot of times I think history, and I'm not a historian, right? But
Okay,
I think
I stand
both
corrected.
for historians and for people, history is
Mm.
about trying to understand what happened and provide a narrative that brings together very disparate factors. And, very often it's about trying to explain why things had, telling a story that gets you to where you are. I think that's part of what comes into it's not just a collection of facts, it's a string of facts and explanations to get you from that explain how you got to where you are. That doesn't suck as a definition. I pulled that one out.
But you
And
did
again, I
stick in
get where you're
that.
coming from.
You did stick
You
in
want
that
to make sure
part narrative.
context. Yeah, but you want to make sure context is there, to
Mhm.
the best of your ability. Because again, when we look at the history that's recorded in the Bible, a lot of what we don't have is context. We don't know why certain things were said at that particular time. However, we have to then try to use other resources to kind of piece those things together, which is along the lines of what you were simply describing, so that we could have a clearer understanding. And in Florida, when we talk about African American history, one of the things that sticks out most is that our governor said it has no value, and that is what I think hit the crux of the anger and the angst that's being now demonstrated in Florida and exhibited in Florida in different ways, where we've had these rallies, where we've had various subgroups meeting to try to find out what can we do to fight this whole notion, when you can pull out two, three, five things out of an 88-page curriculum to say, well, this is why I'm banning this AP course. And he used the term indoctrination. Well, see, my issue with indoctrination is generally when someone is being indoctrinated or a group of people are being indoctrinated, there's a mandate there at some point. You have to actually go through whatever that process is, and you really don't have a choice. Well, an AP course is optional. Not every student is required to take an advanced placement course. So with that, how can one indoctrinate when they're given the option of not taking it? And then some of those things that he pointed out were optional supplemental readings. So I think he's throwing terms in to create or feed a certain populace that are going to go into this whole idea of, as he says, wokeism or woke agenda, which helps, I guess, validate his point as to why he's attempting to do this. But again, when you say African American history has no value, that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And I don't know anything of historical perspectives that doesn't have value, whether it's things that you learn that are good or things that you learn that are bad. You're still learning in that process. And learning, it, to me, always has value because you learn what to do, what not to do, who said what, and how things turned out ultimately in the end. And I think in Florida, when you look at that, when you look at the other attacks on the black community by our governor, it does create some challenges with respect to how, and why people feel the way that they feel. And so how do we get this governor to understand even his attacks on the black community will be actually recorded as part of black history? So he's going to be on one side of it. But
George Wallace. That's just right there. I mean, he will be like George Wallace. I that's a prediction. I don't like to make them, but I'm thinking that's pretty much, he's going to go down more than Trump in some ways, And
Trump wasn't even focused on history. He didn't care about history. He just wanted
cared about himself.
His agenda. Yeah, it was all about him. So for him to give even some attention to other people or other persons, that just wasn't a part of his personality. But this whole notion of, again, African American history having no value, and how do we say, when you look at the contributions of black people in America, from even during the period of enslavement, when they were building the very buildings that our government is operating in. They built the White House, they built the Capitol, and other significant buildings within our country. When you look at their economic contributions, even if you come to even more recent times, let's look at just even hip hop. When I look at value, you create a new music genre which has made more millionaires of people of minorities than any other music genre, if you look at that time span. So when I look at history and and events that have transpired, I wrestle with the notion of no value more so than anything else. Because I'm used to the attacks, not that I want to normalize them and not respond to them, but I'm used to the attacks from even the gubernatorial debate where he told the people not to monkey this up while running against the black candidate. So it didn't bode well, it didn't sound well, but nonetheless, people decided to support him and his positions on various things in spite of his attacks. So just starting with African American history, we're not even going into some of the other things that he's done recently, but just look at the whole study of African American history. Why not any of the other historical history AP courses? Because Japanese history, world history, European history, again, all of them have America somewhere within I guess you could say, operating within the sphere of them. But why focus on just African American history? Why not say, hey, listen, we're going to just remove this section and publish the course? The whole goal, again, from my perspective and from those that I've interacted with, is that he has continued to attack the black community for whatever reason, even if we go back to just recently where he redrew the district maps and we lost 2 black congressional seats out of 4. So we've had consistent attacks by this governor on the black community, and prayerfully we can advance this conversation. Yes, sir.
I don't want to cross too many of those topics. I want to stay with the AP Black History one. Is you were saying the goal, and that's one thing I was sitting here when I was going to ask Dave or you. I just find it hard. I'm like, what's the end goal? What's the goal? What's the reasoning? And I don't feel like I get
it. To become president.
So that doesn't compute to me.
It's the only way it makes sense. I mean, I think, because as I'm listening to Harold talk about these things, mm-hmm. Harold is making very cogent questions that really don't have good answers, right? I mean, why it's AP, it's voluntary, right? Mm-hmm. And to be in an AP, you got to compete for that. And your parents know you're taking it. I mean, what about, and these are people who are getting college credit now to practically be voting, right? And you just sit here and you go, but all of those points are moot. All those points are beside the fact that it's a great chance to lean into the trope of liberal elites threatening traditional American values. That is the essence of the right wing populists at this point, and that is how he gets to be president. He is, unlike Trump, he has a very consistent story, right? He is building up this idea of wokeness, and he's kind of just put his finger on what motivates a lot of people on the extreme right who go to primaries and vote, right? The Trump supporters. And he is offering an ideology, right? He's offering a consistent set of attacks. And, this is why we have Moms for Liberty, because they've politicized education, because that's a great area for a lot of suburban people. And it's an area of concern, and they're able to get in it. It really is working for him, right? It's paying off. And so it doesn't have to make sense. Kind of like when we talked about critical race theory, it made no sense to be against. No one was teaching it. Doesn't matter. The point is that he can still motivate people and scare people. And the attacks on Black culture, Black culture is the dominant second, culture in the United States, right? Sure, we have Asians and we have various Latino cultures, although they're different.
Yeah.
I think Black culture is the biggest, most influential, and so it's the juxtaposition. So they're not there. That's the culture that you differentiate yourself to protect white culture, if that's what you're doing. And so I think that's probably why they are disproportionately targeting African Americans and at various in every way, shape, and form. Actually, at this point, I'm going to go say that. Right? Is there a way that we aren't in some way doing something against that? And it's shocking. It's got me sounding like a freaking liberal. I want to be center right. I want to be out there talking about markets. I want to be condemning socialism, but I can't because these idiots are calling things that aren't socialism, and they're bringing up all this other stuff. All right, so that's my little rant. Sorry about that.
No, hey, it's. Go ahead, Harold.
Harold,
I was
back
going
to
to say,
you.
if I can add, just the notion of CRT alone, and the culture wars that, our governor is, his goal is to become president of the United States. Wouldn't make no mistake. So what he's doing is doing everything he can, similar to what Donald Trump did back in 2015, 2016. Let me make certain statements, let me make certain attacks. It'll gain national attention. And lo and behold, now that I have that national attention, hopefully we're luring people over to our side to support our campaign or future campaign. Now, I don't think he's announced that he's running for president. I do know that one Floridian has announced. So I think, there may be some fear, and there have been subtle attacks here and there, but I don't want to get into that. But going back to even the notion of CRT and them, saying that it's being taught in schools, and what I've expressed to many that I've had this discussion with is, I find it interesting that any school board would allow anyone to come in, complain about something being taught, and not present one shred of evidence. They didn't present a homework assignment. They didn't present a lesson plan from a teacher. As a matter of fact, they didn't even call out whatever teacher's supposedly teaching it. I recently had a conversation with a close friend. She's Republican. I love her to death. But I mentioned to her when she starts all this stuff about CRT, I said, well, wait, give me the name of any teachers that's teaching CRT, because I'm curious. I'm a teacher and I don't know any. Mm-hmm. And never brought up one. Began to talk about other stuff, deflected and went on somewhere else. But again, when you start demanding facts, when you start demanding specific pieces of information, you're going to get a whole lot of other explanations. And this is what we have, I think, where the media has failed. They're busy reporting, but not giving you accurate reporting.
Well, I was
They're supposed to be asking questions when people when they go in front of people, to make sure that what they're stating or what they're stipulating is 100% accurate and not some level of conjecture. Go ahead,
I was
John.
told by a professor, instead of arguing with somebody, just ask follow-up questions.
That's it.
Don't argue with them and argue your point. Just ask
Yeah.
follow-up questions when someone says something is so. Because when you ask for examples or the reasoning, it can never be explained. And I'm going to tell this story. Now, well, Dave knows Chris. And when I first moved in with Chris, it was when Obama was first elected, and we were living in the same apartment, and we got into not an argument, but she says, I don't like Obama's policies. And I was like, well, what don't you like about him? He said, I just don't like them. I said, well, what don't you like about them? Well, they're not good. And I kept asking. And the more I asked, and the more I started asking specific questions, she couldn't figure it out. I said, Chris, you're in a place where she was working where everyone complains about Obama and his policies, and that's all they do. And you don't realize it's seeping into you. And she was just like, and then after that, she was an Obama fan. I didn't make her one, but it's like when she stopped hearing that noise that you're being that word indoctrinated, that you're hearing the whole time, it can influence your thinking. I remember saying this to my dad when I was about 8 years old. I told him I hate Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, let that sink in.
What happened when you recovered from the
He pulled over.
when you returned to consciousness? What happened?
I wasn't 8, whatever age I was in the second grade. So what happened was, when you're a kid, you have your favorite teachers, right? I went to a predominantly non-black school, and I would hear the teachers. I knew nothing about Martin Luther King. You hear about it, but I'm coloring and stuff. I don't know. But you're hearing all your teachers complain about Black History Month, complain about Martin Luther King, and say vile things. And then all you know as a kindergartner, or I think I was a kindergarten, it was one of those early grades. All you know is your favorite teacher is always complaining about this person that you know nothing about. So we're riding in the car. It's Black History Month, and a Dr. Martin Luther King commercial comes on, and I'm just like, ugh, I hate Dr. Martin Luther King. My dad hit those brakes and pulled over so fast. And I'm totally clueless to why he's upset. And just say I got a history lesson that day. If that was the day to give me a Black History Month lesson, that was it. And the whole point of me saying that, for anybody who looked at me crazy, is if you're fed something and you don't know any better, that emotion starts to play on you, and you start to feel that sentiment.
And
I agree. Go ahead, Dave.
There's a lot here, and there is not a discussion of policy, right? We don't have, policy is not going to get you anywhere, and Biden in his State of the Union last night was really trying to fight back on that. He was trying to go and talk about policy and tried to maintain that, and that was encouraging, right? Because he was trying to do that. But and then as he got into confronting Republicans, we saw the outrage crowd, right? The Marjorie Taylor Greens and all people yelling at him as he started to make comments about Republicans. And I look at that and I say, we don't have, on the Republican side, we no longer have a Paul Ryan, right? We don't have a Newt Gingrich. Or for all Newt Gingrich's faults, Newt Gingrich led a policy initiative. They balanced the budget with Bill Clinton, right? And they cared about policy, and they enacted reforms to welfare, and they changed things in you could argue the points, but they were at least arguing the points. They were focused on that. We don't have that, right? And DeSantis is not, DeSantis's situation, I think, is he can bring up these false issues, make them appear to be false issues. And the things he's got over Trump is, one, he's got a consistency. He's got a story, not just whatever comes into his head at any time. he's gone to this issue that I think bubbled up and focused on school boards where small numbers of people actually vote in school board elections, so you can get your guys in there. And so we've seen this grassroots movement. He's tapped into that. And the biggest difference between him and Trump is that he's got a state. He's not just making statements about what he's going to do, he's doing it. And I think that is propelling him in a direction that is, putting him in the front running position to win the Republican nomination. Is that going to put him in a position to win the election? That's a real question,
How do you think Florida reacts to the departure of DeSantis? Like, who's next? Because usually you see when this happens a continuation of whatever's going on, or you see a far turn from whatever's going on when the votes go in an opposite direction.
Got no idea.
What I'll say from my memory in Florida, due to the poor message of Democrats, Florida has a very good chance of continuing the same course. Just being blunt about it, because again, I've spoken to individuals in the Democrat Party at the local level, at the state level, and reached out to the national level to say, hey, what are you doing? Because right now, Florida's not moving in direction that's sensible. Your messaging is piss poor. Mm-hmm. And unless you change something, we're going to continue to stay this course, because the day you're not motivated to get out and vote. We don't have a.
Hold on, Errol. Your audio went out. I don't know if you can hear us, but the audio went out. Dave, you said, I like your response, Dave.
Well, no, I think Harold's point is dead on that. Democrats are in, your big problem is if you start arguing about the AP course or critical race theory or whatever, you're playing their game, right? And you're not going to change anyone's mind about that. You're not going to convince somebody who is very committed to the idea that America is great. It's a Christian white nation that was built from the Pilgrims, and it's just a great opportunities and blah, 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 blah. You're, when you come in and say, well, 1619, right? And you bring in these other issues, those folks who are reacting to that are reacting it not because it's just them thinking that that's the case. It's that they're invested, their identity is invested, their beliefs of what's good, their understanding of the world is invested in that. It's what sort of what Stephen Colbert used to call truthiness, but it's more, right? And so it's not just challenging the fact, it's challenging the institution and their beliefs. And so you're not going to change their mind, right? Whereas if you move over to policy, right, you could say, hey, we have policy issues that we can agree on, but it's boring, right? But meanwhile, they're jumping up and down and saying crazy things, dog whistling, and DeSantis's comment about monkeying things up, right? Okay, everyone's going to claim he's, and in fact, if he is sitting there going, should I use this phrase? And he could if I was his speechwriter and I was just doing the job of advising him, right. I might go, hey, look, in the current climate, you use it as not clearly racist. And so it'll get people freaking out about you, but your supporters are just going to rally around you and say, hey, come on, that wasn't racist. That's a term, and they're going to like that DeSantis is pissing off the libs, right? And I've overheard, and I would overhear people talking about Trump supporters, because I don't hang out with a lot of these people. But when I've kind of gotten into their conversations, I've heard people just talking, yeah, Trump's just pissing them off, and they're really happy about that. And so DeSantis, I think, is tapping into that vibe. And so he's playing a game that's going to win with a portion of the Republican Party. And like I say, his problem is this guy, I just don't know if this is going to translate into a general election win at all. We'll have to see. But
What do you feel? Do you feel like this is the path to take and it's going to work out for him, Harold?
Well, I'm sorry, I had a call come in, so I got disconnected. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Basically, again, DeSantis is going to keep pushing the very button that he's pushing because it's giving him some level of success. What we have to look at is with the Democrat Party, and I just had a meeting with some youth the other day who were our youth council with the NAACP, and I told them one of my goals is to teach them how to fight. And when I say fight, I'm not talking about getting physical, but knowing how to use their minds in order to make sure when they are confronted with issues that they're going to be confronted with in this race, in this journey that they're embarking upon as a youth council member of NAACP, that they know exactly how to strategize and confront whatever those things that are in front of them. Right now, if we were in a boxing ring, I will tell you this: Democrat Party would probably get beat to smithereens, simply because they don't know how to counterpunch. It's one thing to be elusive as a Muhammad Ali, but at some point he had to know how to punch. He could do the rope a dope and get you to punch yourself out and get you dog tired, but if he didn't hit you at some point, you're still in the fight. And until the Democrat Party learns how to counterpunch, we're going to continue to have the failures that we've had. Not only that, but with what I know about local politics, you have individuals who are consultants who've lost race after race after race and continue to get no bid contracts to continue to do the consulting. Why? Because they've either put fear in those decision makers or they've convinced them that they did all that they could and it was the numbers that led to them not being successful. But in either case, with our governor, he's going to continue to doing as he does because it's worked for him. And until there's a counter strategy, we're going to continue to experience what we're experiencing in Florida. And unfortunately, it's not going to bode well. For example, I'll give you one counterpunch argument that I would have brought up a long time ago. Our education system has been in the lower quartile during his entire tenure. Our education nationally ranked, we're in the lower quartile. We're we've been vacillating between 42 and 46 the entire time.
We used to always be in the mid-20s to low 20s. Yep.
But my point here is the Democrats aren't even bringing it up. He continues to siphon their money out of the education system, putting it towards charter schools. Now they got a voucher program. They're now wanting to give vouchers to parents that want to homeschool their children. Problem is what's the counter to that? If that parent gets tired in the middle of the year and decide I want to send my child back to school and they've gotten the money, they're not required to send that money back to the school district. They still pocket that money. The same way charter schools, when they kick children out toward the end of the school year, 2 or 3 months before the end of the school year, after they've gotten that final payment, they don't have to send any of that money back to the school district. So until we get something in place that's going to minimize the losses, our education system is going to continue to suffer. And because Democrats are not trying to counterpunch and hit him in the education basket, so to speak, we're going to continue to lose this argument. We're going to continue to lose this race. And Florida is essentially doomed from an education perspective.
Dave always talks about, you've talked about it in about 2 or 3 episodes, the importance of messaging. And that's what you feel like, you've mentioned that how bad it is on the Democrat side, their messaging.
It's not just Florida, it's nationally.
Yeah.
Well, they've never been a party that has had discipline. Of course, the Republicans.
Wow! You didn't do that on purpose either. So.
That was the Freudian. I know that much.
I just talk about Ukraine so much. The Republicans used to be good at messaging. Now they aren't, and now they're at a point where, and we saw this in the State of the Union, where Biden called out the individuals who were saying, hey, we want to do away with Social Security, right? And it was funny to see Mike Lee acting, they cut to him because he's one of the guys who's been out there saying we should I want to rip up Medicare. I want to rip up Social Security, pull it out. And he's there like, oh, you're lying when you're saying it. And, it's like, no, dude, you're the one he's talking about. And the thing is, though, that one of the things I found interesting there is I think Biden actually was helping Republicans a little bit by getting them on the record, because most of them don't want to get rid of Social Security. And in fact, it's a horrible idea for their electorate. Is, red states depend more on Social Security than people in blue states, because people in blue states tend to have 401ks and things. And George Bush found that trying to reform Social Security was a lead balloon. And so I think he, in a way, helped them out by allowing a lot of Republicans to shout, to clap and agree, no, we're not going to do that. We're not. And the thing, though, is that the Republicans are in this position where one or two people can really define their agenda, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, because Kevin McCarthy is so dependent, right? He gave up all, the biggest wussy, I'm going to call him a wussy, ever, because, he gave up every principle to become the speaker. I feel that is an objective statement. And, you could argue, or you could defend it at least. But that's worse than Democrats. And the Democrats' problem is that they've got, the squad, right? They have the people who are most progressive and are out there, sort of defining them. But it's not as bad, right? Those folks are moderately better. The question is, can the Democrats adopt? I mean, could they adopt the tone that Biden took in the State of the Union, right? And that tone, I don't know if it'd work, but it, in a lot of ways, that address was a master class in bringing the old school bipartisan governance that Biden represents at his core to bear, and fighting back against the MAGA extremists, which McCarthy doesn't like that term, but I think he doesn't like it because it's, he's the guy who's suffering from them. And I don't know, though, that Democratic activists would be motivated to do that. That's boring. That's old, and there was research done on the last elections where they found that actually it was on the 2016 election, not on the last election, but they looked at who the people the Democrats were sending out to canvass to do grassroots, and they found that those people were just very liberal. They're young people, very liberal, and not representative of the core Democratic voter. And they said in a lot of ways, some of the messaging in the campaign played really, really good to everyone in the campaign and was terrible with their electorate. And I don't know Republicans have that problem. I think even the MAGA crowd are tapping into something that resonates with a lot of people on their side. And so Democrats do have that problem of having kind of that elitist thing in there, a lot of their young activists. And so the question is, Harold's idea of saying, here's how we counterpunch, that was exactly the kind of old school, hey, let's get back to what matters. Let's get back to policy, right? And I just wonder whether a young Democratic activist would consider that a good counterpunch, right? I do. You do. But are we just old guys at this point? And that, I think, is the challenge for the Democrats, to master themselves and to get on message. And I don't hold out much hope.
Harold, final thoughts or response to what Dave just said?
Well, again, it all falls back to how we communicate. If we're going to be effective and if we're going to be and we need to be efficient. At the end of the day, I will say when I look at the communication mechanism of the Republican Party, when it comes to certain issues, they stay on message. They have an engine that, they'll go on the Sunday talk shows and talk about the same thing and try to give the same impression, even if they're blatantly lying in the face of the American people. They will continue to send that message forward, hoping people will believe it, accept it, embrace it, and then support them. But as far as Democrats, we spend more time on defense than we do on offense. And you'll never win a fight if you don't score points. And offense has to score more points than the other team. So I'm hoping that, as things move forward and as things continue to progress, that the Democrat Party would learn that, hey, in order for them to be successful, and I think, with their focus on taking care of the poor, trying to deal with homelessness, looking at the immigration issue from a different lens than how the Republicans choose to handle it. But when we talk about even being as Dave alluded to earlier, a Christian nation, there's certain populations that Jesus cared about, that he spoke up and protected. He said, when I was in prison, did you visit me? When I have nowhere to lay my head, what I'm saying? If he didn't have any clothes, would you clothe him? Would you feed him? Those are things that quote unquote Christians, if Christ spewed it, are supposed to be doing. And when I look at our Republican Party, I don't see it. I don't hear it, even in their discussions, whether they do it or not. I don't even hear it in their discussions. So a lot of what we are hearing is just that rhetoric. It's just talk. And one of the reasons why I tell people I am a registered Democrat is simply because I cannot align myself with a party that will not, denounce the KKK, that will not denounce the Oath Keepers, that will not denounce the Proud Boys and all of these other violent extremist groups who have basically announced to the world what their agenda is and how they feel about others, so to speak. And so, with that said, I'm hopeful, but even in Florida, it's not going to be no matter how hopeful I am, we're not going to have the results that are desired if we don't change the way we're doing business in Florida. So prayerfully moving forward, and I appreciate the opportunity, we can get some things together, put some things in motion so that hopefully we can deal with not just this African-American history issue, but other issues affecting the Black community in Florida, and hopefully be able to turn back many of the attacks that we've experienced up to this point.
Awesome. Thank you, Harold. Hey, everybody. It was a great episode. You're going to see us in a couple weeks. If you have questions over the next 2 weeks, if you're one of the people that follow what's going on in Ukraine, because now we have the Dave's Ukraine segment, because a lot of people emailed about, can we get Dave to talk more about Ukraine? Also, Dave has his own YouTube channel where you can get a lot of episodes and topics about Ukraine. What's that channel, Dave?
On TikTok. Dr. Dave Hayes on TikTok. That's where most of it goes.
Oh, you've transitioned. I remember when you started, I was seeing most of it on YouTube. I have started seeing some of that stuff pop up on TikTok. So,
yeah,
because I was trying to at you because I put the snippets of our episodes on there and I couldn't find you. And then I found
Dr. Dave Hayes.
So you can get a lot more of that on the conference. If you have a topic, political or government wise, that you want to talk about, go ahead and send that to me, keoneproductions@gmail.com, or comment on the YouTube site. If you feel that you have a strong opinion or want to have a discussion about any of these topics, go ahead and write in, and we may have you on the show as a guest to talk to Harold and Dave. Harold and Dave, another excellent show. Thank you, gentlemen, and we will see you all on the next one.
Blessings.
Take care.